Leno built his life around motion. For decades, he chased late-night stages, roaring engines, and endless gigs. Work wasn't something he balanced with life. It was life itself. As a young comedian, he slept in his car, showered at gyms, and drove hours between clubs just to stay sharp. When he finally became a household name, that same momentum stayed. He showed up early, worked late, and rarely slowed down. For Jay, stillness wasn't peace. It was danger. It meant uncertainty, loss of control, and the terrifying possibility of becoming irrelevant. His identity was bound to motion. But life eventually began issuing warnings. First a garage fire, then a motorcycle crash, and finally something no audience or engine can outrun: time and illness. The question became not whether Jay would stop, but what would make him finally choose to slow down. The fire that should have ended everything. In November 2022, Jay Leno faced an accident that should have forced him to stop. In his Burbank garage, he was working on a 1907 steam car with his friend Dave Cockey. Steam cars of that era used gasoline near a pilot light flame to heat water into steam. While trying to unclog a fuel line, gasoline sprayed onto Jay's face and hands. In an instant, a spark ignited the fuel. Flames erupted. Jay later said he knew immediately that breathing in gasoline could burn his lungs, so he tried to stay calm. Dave pulled him out within seconds, but the damage was already severe. He suffered second- and third-degree burns to his face, hands, and chest, and was rushed to the Grossman Burn Center. Multiple surgeries followed, including skin grafts from donor skin. For most people, this would have been a life-stopping event. For Jay, it was merely another obstacle. Returning too soon, the risk of momentum. Almost immediately, Jay downplayed the severity of the fire publicly. He joked about his appearance, telling audiences he looked like the Hulk. If the Hulk shrank and aged badly. He returned to performing within days, not because he was healed or pain-free, but because stopping felt worse than continuing. His instinct was to function. To be on stage meant the schedule was intact, the rhythm remained, and life was still moving forward. Friends and doctors urged rest. But Jay's response was not denial. It was control. Comedy was his structure. A mic and an audience kept his world ordered. The fire didn't change his drive, but it exposed the real danger. His body was no longer invincible, yet his mindset still believed it was. He treated recovery like a speed bump instead of a wall. The flames left scars, but they didn't stop his motion. Not yet. The motorcycle crash. A quiet wake-up call. 2 months later, in January 2023, Jay experienced a second accident that was even harder to dismiss. While testing a restored 1940 Indian motorcycle, he noticed the smell of gasoline and turned into a parking lot to check it. Without warning, he struck a low wire stretched across the lot with no marker or warning flag. The impact threw him from the bike. The injuries were serious: a broken collarbone, fractured ribs, and cracked kneecaps. This accident lacked the drama of fire. No explosion, no flames, just a hidden hazard and a body forced to stop. Jay joked about it publicly, calling his shows regular and extra crispy. But behind the humor, something shifted. 2 serious accidents in under a year were no longer random. They were a pattern, and for someone who defined himself through motion, being forced to pause was unbearable. The cost of stillness. Pain beyond physical injury. The hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the pause. Broken bones demand stillness. Recovery required limitations Jay could not bypass with discipline. He could no longer simply push through. Mobility itself became an obstacle. Simple tasks required planning and help. Friends stopped admiring his toughness and started worrying. Fans stopped asking about gigs and began asking if he was okay. This time, his body enforced rest. The recovery stretched longer, and the warnings were louder. Jay didn't retire. He didn't disappear. But the pattern was undeniable. His body was no longer absorbing consequences the way it once had, and the realization began to take root. Momentum had a price. He had lived for decades believing that motion was safety, but now the body was proving him wrong. The quiet crisis. When love requires stillness. Then came the moment that changed everything. In January 2024, Jay filed for conservatorship over his wife, Mavis Leno, after her dementia diagnosis. For decades, Mavis had been Jay's constant, private, strong, and independent. Their marriage was not a public spectacle. But dementia dismantles life quietly, then suddenly. Familiar habits slip away. Memories fade. The person you love remains present, but not the same. Jay didn't hesitate. He stepped into the role of full-time caregiver and sought conservatorship, not to control Mavis, but to protect her. Court documents indicated that Mavis could not fully participate in financial or medical decisions. She sometimes failed to recognize Jay or recall basic personal information. The filing was not about power. It was about stability. And this was something Jay couldn't outwork or joke away. There was no stage solution, no punchline, no audience to rally him forward. The shift from applause to presence caregiving demands stillness, patience, repetition, and presence. It doesn't reward speed or endurance. It rewards consistency. Friends noticed Jay changing. He began turning down work more often, not because ambition faded, but because priorities shifted. He didn't announce a retirement. He simply began coming home more. He chose shorter tours, closer shows, and same-day appearances so he could return to Mavis. Work didn't vanish, but it became intentional. He was still driven, but his center of gravity moved from the stage to home. The same discipline that built his career now anchored him to one person. He wasn't performing for applause. He was showing up for love. And in a world that celebrates reinvention, Jay's choice was quiet, not to disappear, but to stay. The hidden danger, health problems you can't see. Even beyond accidents and caregiving, Jay faced another threat, one that left no visible mark. He spoke openly about high cholesterol, emphasizing that it doesn't announce itself. You can feel fine and still be at risk. As someone who understands engines, he compared it to a car that looks perfect on the outside but fails because something inside is blocked. Doctors told him managing cholesterol wasn't optional. It wasn't about toughness or willpower. It was biology. This warning landed differently than fire or crashes because there was no dramatic moment attached to it. No explosion. No visible injury. Just numbers on a chart. Jay began talking more about regular checkups and listening to doctors. He realized that some warnings are quiet, and the quiet ones are often the most important to hear. The meaning of goodbye. A new definition of success. Jay Leno's legacy will always include 22 years hosting The Tonight Show and decades of stand-up that shaped late-night television. Those achievements are fixed, but this chapter, showing up daily for someone who may not remember yesterday, may define him just as clearly. He did not stop because of age, scandal, or failure. He slowed down because of love. And that is rare. Jay still performs, he still prepares, he still jokes, but his schedule is anchored to home. Work no longer dictates every decision. Home does. Caregiving asks for consistency, not charisma. It asks for patience without applause. And Jay embraced it anyway. In a world built on motion, he chose presence. In an industry that rewards momentum, he chose to slow down for one person. That is not a goodbye to his career. It is a redefinition of what matters. Outro, the man who finally stood still. Jay Leno spent his life moving forward, proving that consistency can beat talent and that work can become a form of safety. He survived fire and crashes, joked through pain, and kept going. But eventually, life offered a warning it couldn't be ignored. Time, illness, and love require stillness. His choice wasn't dramatic or public. It wasn't announced with a farewell tour or a headline. It was quieter and more profound. He began measuring his life in mornings, routines, and presence. He chose responsibility over applause, and in doing so, he proved that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop and stay.